Okay, Angela Crawford. When you speak about diversity in the employment workplace, what ended up happening, Angela Crawford, believe it was since 2015, may have been 2017. I did an open letter and I sent her communication. I'm saying, hey, look, your policy on hiring disabled and diversity is not working, and I sent her faxes, and I sent her a link to the open letter on rayoadvocacy.net or .org is one of them. And guess what? Nothing ever happened. So when you talk about individuals like Frank Lawrence, who basically was engaging in this pattern of hiring people who he wanted to, from my understanding, upon information and belief. And the problem is there really wasn't any response and any effort to have open and competitive employment. So basically, HR leaves it to a supervisor or people in the field to, at their discretion, hire people that they need without a concrete diversity, multiculturalism policy in hiring. And so that's how you have the prejudice that continues against hiring someone with a disability. That's it. it's there, and then you follow that. In addition to that, you have. I mean, once someone starts to hire their own friends and you circumvents the whole system, and you can tell because if you have an employment position that's only posted for like 2 days and it's off, not 10 business days or anything like that, you know something fishy. So basically, you should have performed an audit of the hiring person anyway, but I'm sure it looked like they didn't. But either way, the bottom line, the most important line here is this, is that a customary policy practice is evident when you don't have an affirmative action policy of employment. So that's one of the things that you're talking about there. All right? Hey, how you doing? The video segment that you just saw is from the South Wilmington Wrestling Center. Wait, not Wrestling Center. Hold on. From the South Wilmington Emergency Room. No, wait. It's from the South Wilmington Funeral Parlor? Funeral Cemetery Place? No. Wait. It's an emergency room or urgent care? Or is it corrections facility? No. Oh, it's the South Wilmington Shelter for Men or Center for Men. You just saw video segments from that nice facility, which is next to, believe it or not, a daycare center? No. What is it? What was that? Elementary school? No. It's a family center right next to it, Oak City, for families that have kids. So you have a center for homeless shelter for men next to a family center for kids and families. Someone had a bright idea there. But first, let's talk about capacity. This video is being made in two capacities. One, in my own capacity as a person who has a disability and has worked at the shelter. And two, in the capacity of helping my kids make sure that their mom does not get hurt. Two capacities here, just want to make sure. Now, I applied for various positions there at the shelter recently, center. And the last time they had diversity there was in the 2000s on the urban ministries. Since then, it's become all of one race. Majority of one race uses the population, the facilities there. And the majority of one race works there. So diversity, multiculturalism is out the door, dude. Out the door. Not even there. Now,
the subject at hand is this, is that you have a facility that is poorly designed from the get-go. What does that mean? ADA requirements are very specific. ADA requirements says, hey, look, if you got parking, you're going to have a certain amount of spots dedicated to the disabled. But not only that, parking is to be distinguished between employee parking and public parking, people who use the facility on a regular basis. Two distinctions there, okay? All spots are supposed to, not only that, if you're going to have parking, your parking has to be proportionate to how many people use the facility. Now, it hasn't really been proportionate to how many people use the facility, number one, but then when they built Oak City, they sort of combined everything. I remember when I first started working there, what ended up happening is there was a fire lane up in front of the facility. We were told, you cannot park there under any circumstance. Why? Emergency vehicles come there, and trust and believe you me, they use the facility a lot. And so when you talking about is it a question of whether or not the fire truck is going to come, or the ambulance is going to come, or Hawaii 5-0 going to come, police department? That's not a question. It's a question of how many times per week. So that's the biggest question, is how many times per week are they going to come back? So who had the bright idea to put a gate that does not work in front of the fire lane? I have a question with that. But first of all, before you even get that far, is why would you build a family center right next to a shelter that has registered sex offenders in it? And that's just absolutely insane, psychotic. Even if you have even if county or the government got a waiver, the waiver would be based on the fact that you actually registering and keeping a check on how many registered sex offenders actually use the facilities. Now, from my professional thing is, most of the time these guys didn't have ID. Most of the time they were fleeing the law anyway. So when you're going to go ahead and have a shelter and get a waiver of sex offenders right next to a family center, that doesn't even make sense, because you would have to go ahead and promise and affirm that you're going to make sure for sure that no one that's a registered sex offender will be using the facilities within a couple feet. I mean, within 100 feet of a shelter. I mean, that just doesn't make sense. You have a shelter within 100 feet of a family center. The other thing is this, making this short, because the PowerPoint, the slides you're about to see are going to focus on low barrier facility. Some person, grand person in government. I have an MA in political science. So I'm speaking to you out of authority in terms of being able to go ahead, analyze public policy, analyze shelter policy, and how it's used, and knowing, as a person with disability, I actually have in-depth knowledge about ADA. Now, low barrier shelter, what does that mean? Low barrier shelter means these guys are let in to the shelter while they're high. They're high, so what happens when someone comes in high? When you're high, you can either just go in there and fall asleep, or you can go ahead there and start fighting, or these are just some of the possibilities, or you can go ahead and OD and die. Okay, now if you're gonna have low barrier, you need to have medical personnel then on the premises to go ahead and protect workers and protect the population. Because what ends up happening is, if you follow the public record, how many times EMS is called out there, and how many people get pronounced dead that were originally at the shelter that get pronounced dead at the hospital, you're going to see that number went skyrocketing high. Why? Because now people, instead of dying in the woods, they come to the shelter and they die in the shelter. If I was an employee, that's the worst case scenario for me, because I could go ahead and sue your hamburgerness because of the fact that I'm being traumatized, because now I'm working at a funeral parlor because people are dying right there inside the facility. They're ODing. Not only that, it's like public policy. The law says in North Carolina, You cannot articulate a threat against a government employee. Do you think that someone that's high on the kite, high as a kite, and in that state of mind is not going to threaten you if you tell them to go to bed? Or if you tell them, please get off the table instead of sitting on the table, just sitting on the chair. You think that they're going to actually listen to you and obey what you got to say? Hell to the no. If you try to deny them access to the facility, they're going to argue and fight with you. That's point of fact. So if you're going to change it to a low barrier scenario, let's say I'm an employee there. I'll give you a concrete example. I'm an employee there. The guy, I tell him, hey, look, the regulations of this, you got to leave the facilities. The guy says, no, hell no. And then he starts communicating threats to you. Now, it depends. Some people might be able to hold it in and keep it intact and be professional all the way through. But if you're creating an environment, a hostile work environment, if you're creating a hostile work environment where you're letting people that are high, people that are drunk, and when you get high, you get superhuman powers, and you're willing to fight. So you're letting them in the facility, so this poor little workers might be like, dude, I gotta defend myself, and I might have to act ghetto a little bit to defend myself by action, because it happens in the moment, all right? You might be able to say, well, I need to just call 911 and have them removed. But then if your policy at the shelter says, we're a low barrier, we can't get them removed, you got a big problem, because now you have gone against public policy, which says you can't threaten a public employee. You've got to go instead and put in a shelter policy that creates a hostile work environment. All the rest is going to be on the video. All the rest is going to be narrated. But I wanted to give you an opening segment because I have applied again for positions there. Now, they don't want a handicapped person there. Urban Ministries had a handicapped person there. Bilingual. Speak Spanish. I used to cater to all the Hispanic folk. I used to help them all the time. Not here, dude, because they just want to cater to a certain population. See the rest of the video. If you need a comment, I don't care, as long as it's positive. RayoAdvocacy.com is our email website, and come visit. And I'm saying this again in the capacity of making sure. In 2008, 2009, I requested an ADA accommodation. Where I worked at then, one step was an employee entrance, and the visitor entrance had no steps. Now I said to the people at my employment, I said, can I use the entrance that doesn't have no steps? They said, no, sir. All employees have to come in the employee entrance. I said, dude, I'm in a wheelchair, dude. And there's only one step, dude. I mean, just no steps in the front versus one step. I mean, I could pop my wheelchair back by accident and it hurt me. I could hurt myself in any type of way. They didn't want to listen to me, okay? It would have cost them $0 to say, yes, you can use the front door. But I'm not going to tell you the outcome of that one. I got injured. I got a head injury. And right now, what's going through at the shelter is reminding me, and I talked to my children, and my son in particular, and they don't want their moms to go through anything like I did over zero accommodation. And so what ends up happening is that I'm making this video to show you're not hiring disabled employees. You don't have the right parking, and you just are crazy on your policies, dude. You're putting a shelter next to a daggone family center. And from what I heard from one of the employees that came, the access services with Rayo Advocacy. By the way, Teresa Smith knows nothing of this video, has no participation in it, has no knowledge it's even being done. But I have a church, an organization, and I provide help to people. But I mean, you guys found one of the girls from there on the Greenway. One of the girls at the Oak Center went missing, and they found the homeless people invited her down the Greenway and almost violated her. God bless. Take care. See you later.
Okay, when you talk about adverse work environment and low barrier, how does that relate? Low barrier should equal to having additional support personnel that are qualified to handle the low barrier population. The people who come in are stinking drunk and are more likely to be either have had too much drugs in their system altogether, or they're at the brink of dying altogether. So basically, your OD candidates come into the shelter and they end up dying at the shelter. And your low barrier should include then, as part of your low barrier policy, is additional security to protect your employees, and additional medical trained PAs, RNs, people there to deal with a rise in deaths due to overdosing. Your Narcan, I mean, when you have allegations or things going on at the center that, well, there's allegations that some workers were just taking on Narcan for themselves or for their loved ones, or allegations and upon information I believe, by the way, that you have employees who are threatened, but then at the moment of being threatened, they accidentally said something that they shouldn't have said. Well, first of all, if there was a concrete policy to deal with, to follow up with statutory policy, which is statutory, says you can't threaten a government employee. So that your shelter policy has to follow public policy. And if you don't have that, then you have scenarios wherein an employee may say something that they may not intend to say, or were basically trying, in the effort to defend themselves, would they have a right to defend themselves? They may have said, "I will beat your hamburger butthole in a second." Not intentional. Or say, "Trust and believe. If I go up to my car right now and go get what I got in there, you might not be survive this encounter." Or they say, "Oh yeah, meet me around back after work, and we'll talk about this 3 blocks down the street." Those are scenarios where, when I worked there, what ended up happening, employees were actually jumped on, especially the female ones. They were attacked by these population because they're known to be violent. So the population that you serve is violent by itself. And then when you're lowering the standard even further to go against statutory law and public policy by not having additional security measures in place to protect those employees, then you're creating a negligence lawsuit altogether. You're creating, because someone is going to get hurt, or someone, even the whole, you just created a hostile work environment. So your policy is fine if you want to have that policy, but you have the resources. You have to invoke the resources to go with it. That's the problem. Is that if you do not have the resources, if you do not, then this whole thing, this whole shelter / center becomes a grave site. And it's just by population. You just go ahead and look at the published statistics about how many times EMS was called. Someone was dead as a doornail, and they were pronounced dead at the hospital, but technically they died at the shelter. If I was a loved one of someone who died at the hospital and traced back to the fact that the person was at the shelter, I would say I would sue the shelter. And there's no statute of limitations on murder. Not the last time I checked. And that's a Department of Health issue for licensing these facilities also, who lack the proper personnel to run it. So if you don't have the medical personnel to run it and you have low barrier, not only is the loved one entitled for a compensation for wrongful death and negligence, criminal, by the way, that's criminal issues, because you know or should know that with your policy, you have to hire medical personnel. So if they come in drunk, you can't just put them on the bed and leave them there. You have to put them on the bed and keep checking to make sure they're breathing. Have someone medically trained to take their pulse, blood pressure, and so forth. And you think someone that's drunk that bad is going to be like willfully saying, "Oh yeah, sure, come over here and take my blood pressure." Yeah, no, that person may go ahead and punch you in the face because really they need to be in a facility, a medical facility, that emergency room, or urgent care, and not at a shelter. So your policy is right for wrongful death and negligence. Because you have not implemented the second phase to go with that policy, which is having additional personnel there. And safeguarding public policy and statutory law says you cannot threaten a government employee. So if a government employee accidentally says something that they're not supposed to, whether they did or not is not the question, because the adverse hostile work environment is already there. The dilemma that we face here is, as a family, that we have to deal with the possibility that we may have a parent who will be incapacitated because of the denial of an ADA accommodation. $0. $0. Let someone park at a level area in the back, or more importantly, ADA, follow ADA guidelines, and go ahead and make a survey of the whole facility, and you'll come to find out that you are no way in compliance with ADA, because you don't have distinction between employee and public parking. You're combining parking from another facility altogether, and then you don't label these things. There's no employee handicap, public handicap, and you don't have enough space to begin with. So you might want to consider. I'm glad. I mean, the biggest thing is, I don't know how in the fire code did you ever get to put a gate in the fire lane. I don't understand how you did that, because then this is what I've come to know, is that these dudes will come park in the back of the facility. Most of them don't got no license, so they got their license suspended. They don't have insurance, or they have expired tags, or basically they're driving drunk to go park there. And I know when I worked there, I worked with law enforcement. Law enforcement would come and say, "Hey, look, these people are not using the facilities. Can you trespass them for me?" Yeah, I wrote a trespass form out there, and it was served on the person. The person refused to leave. The person got arrested because they were using the back area back there to have sex, drugs, all this other stuff was being used back there. And then it hasn't changed when I worked there. And that people still are using facilities, using the grounds, and not really in the shelter. So you have a big problem. And it's you knowing, you being policy makers, you being employees, knowing that if you see the dude coming to park his car and he's wavering just to get in through the gate, and he almost hit employee cars and resident cars to begin with, then you have a duty to go ahead and say, "Hey, look, let me go address this scenario," and say, "Hey, look, you can't come back in," and call law enforcement if you need to. Do whatever else you need to go ahead and address the scenario. But then don't attack. In other words, it has to be professionalism and policy in place to properly address known dangerous scenarios. That's what I'm talking about. So ADA, if you know that policy and facility structure is such that you're in violation, then make a temporary accommodation. That's it. I got injured way back when, and it was over a step. One step. An employee entrance. One step. Visitor entrance, no step. It was open when I came to work earlier before I even came to work, and the visitor entrance was open, and all I asked was, "Hey, look, can I use that entrance?" No, you have to use the employee entrance. But the employee entrance is not accessible. Oh, it doesn't matter. Well, I don't want my children, and basically the capacity, going back to capacity. Our EO by RO means that I am doing this at the request of one person, one child at this point, and that is EO. And it's also with reference to me doing it at my capacity in terms of that I am a person with disability who is being actively discriminated against right now in employment practices. So, and ADA compliance. Thank you. Have a nice day. I remember when the shelter first opened um well, when I first started working there, it was called the Overflow. We came into contact with a lot of bodily fluids, a lot of stuff that we didn't need to come into contact with, and that hasn't changed. OSHA requirements and safety and Department of Health requirements. I mean, you go to a hospital, they'll have gowns, and a lot of places of employment will provide employees with changes of outfits, because they'll commercially clean outfits just to make sure that they're not carrying home anything. They'll provide schmucks and shoe coverings and so forth because they want to guarantee in that health environment that they do not take home some of the stuff that they get exposed to because they're dealing with the public all the time. Now, since the shelter is open, that never had to. You always, God forbid, you always had to go through personal stuff of people, the public, the users of the shelter, with your bare hands. You might get the little plastic gloves, but here's the problem with plastic gloves, the little latex gloves, whatever you want to call them, is that they're not protection against being pricked by the syringes that these users have in their personal belongings. The other thing is this, I remember we had to go ahead and do drug testing. We did it on top of the desk. We got the sample carried it from the bathroom to the resource room and ran it to our little kit. Dude, it's like, that was not a professional lab. And we're not laboratory technicians, but we were performing drug tests. Exposed to biological fluids, take the urine and go back, flush it down the toilet. There was never really those biological hazard containers in there to get rid of the urine samples and whatever, and improperly dispose of things the way in a healthcare environment would do. So one of the other things is this, especially that population, especially way back when you had the exposure to that. In Wake County, there was that bed bug epidemic. Well, we suffered because of it. This family household did, because you do not provide the proper equipment for these employees that work there. So fleas, bed bugs, whatever other critters that these guys bring in, lice. A lot of the times the guys really had lice really bad. I mean, it was just crazy, dude. Lice and mosquito bites, dude. They were pricked like porcupines, dude, with mosquito bites. I mean, you had a lot of their skin and what do you call that? I forgot what they call it. Wherein you get infected really bad and it's real red and so forth. I forget what at this moment I can't think of it, but they had a lot of oozing of skin. They would get on their cots with the oozing skin and not properly treated. I mean, so as workers, OSHA, Department of Health standards, they're really not being applied. And that's aside from everything else, because the focus is that we want to ensure that diversity and disability policy is applied, but also that you go ahead and make sure that someone that we love does not get hurt. And part of that is even in this COVID environment. I mean, people, you get tested, and if you have low barrier, um, I just don't see how it's working that you got all these guys going outside and coming back and possibly exposed, and you're not really screening as soon as they come in. Did you get exposed to so and so, whatever? Not to my knowledge, anyway. But basically, I just wanted to address the OSHA component in that you still don't provide uniforms, commercial uniforms. You don't have people changing into clothes or smocks and have face gear, eye gear, whatever you want to call it, on a regular basis when you get over there. So, as an employee, it happened when it was overflow. I mean, dude, I cannot tell you how many. What kills me is that the biggest thing is that there's no separate with employee and public bathrooms. There was never a real distinction, and that was always a problem because you're going to use a toilet that a client just used, and you don't know what that person is, syphilis or whatever other disease they might have. So what ends up happening is you get exposed to that because it's a basic thing. If in that environment you should have built it in that you have a separate male and female employee bathroom. Period. Male and female employee bathroom separated from the clients. Make sure you have at least 2 employees use it at a time because God forbid if someone's in there making a number 2. And but I mean we had a shared bathroom sometimes in the overflow, and then the same thing type scenario started happening at the shelter when you still had to. When it first opened up, though, the biggest benefit is that when everything was sanitized, employees could actually use the bathrooms in the dorm before the population came in to use the facilities. So we got to use clean bathrooms before they came in. And that was sort of the trade-off. But it's really from design. The person and or persons who are in charge of policy making and dreaming up these bright ideas really needs to be looked at because you're not following basic protective type scenarios for Department of Health and OSHA standards. So that's what I'm saying. Hope, and that's a side note. I mean, so I just wanted to make sure I had it on there.